Hi everyone, Dr. Gustin here. I'm going to present to you just a short discussion about osmosis. Osmosis is the diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane. And so what that means, it's a movement of water from high concentration to low through the membranes that surround cells. Now there's some other models that you can use too, but mostly what we're talking about are the movement of water through cells. Osmosis is an incredibly important concept and a phenomenon in the human body. We use osmosis to make urine. We use osmosis to balance our body fluids. And you probably are familiar with sometimes if you eat a lot of salty food, you might get swollen tissues, like your hands might feel swollen. That has to do with osmosis. It's a balance of water. So what I have here, the circle represents a cell. And I'm going to tell you that cells have roughly 1% salt in them. Okay, now we can be talking about any solute, sugar, salt, anything like that, that selectively passes through membranes. But in this case, I'm just going to simplify it and call it salt. And so if I have 1% salt, that means the cell contains 99% water. Okay, so 99% water. And what can happen to this cell is if we take this cell and we put it in 100% water, just like you get out of your H2O water, just like you get out of your faucet, roughly 100% water. Osmosis says water is going to move from high concentration to low. So what happens in this case, if the water is 100% outside of the cell and 99% inside the cell, water is going to move from high concentration to low concentration. And ultimately, osmosis will continue happening until this is balanced. Now, it's never going to be balanced because that salt is always going to make the concentration of water a little bit lower inside the cell. So ultimately, a cell like our red blood cells will ultimately swell and pop if you put it in 100% water. And this is a good explanation as to why when somebody's really dehydrated and you might give them an IV that contains a lot of water, but you don't give them 100% water in that IV because it will pop their blood cells. The water will be too concentrated. The water will move into the cells and pop them, and you can imagine that that's not good. So what we do when somebody's dehydrated is we'll give them an IV that contains something called normal saline. And guess what normal saline is? It's about 1% salt and 99% water. Okay, so right here in the diagram that I have, if we take our cell, we put it in 100% water, we say that's a hypotonic solution. Hypo means the solution, the surrounding liquid, has a low amount of solute, has a low amount of salt. Hypo is low. So this is a hypotonic solution. And another way to remember it is if I put a cell in a hypotonic solution, the cell will get big and round like an O, hypo, and it will swell and ultimately pop. Okay, so let's back up. And we've got our same cell. So we take that same cell, and let's say we're going to put it, instead of in 100% water, I'm going to put it in a solution that has 5% salt. And that leaves me with 95% water. Okay, osmosis says water moves from high concentration to low. So now look at which way the water is going to move. It's at 99% to 95. So in this situation, if you put the cell in a salty solution, then the cell's going to actually lose water. And ultimately, that cell will kind of shrivel up and it will die because it will not be able to function without water. Okay, we call a solution that has a high amount of salt. This has 5% salt. It has a high amount of salt. We call that a hypertonic solution, high salt. In a hypertonic solution, a cell will shrivel up, and that will also be really bad. So that can happen and cause a lot of problems. Dehydrating our cells too much can be deadly to them. You've seen plants kind of in hypertonic solutions when they they're not watered enough and they get kind of wilty. So the cells are kind of shriveling and the plant's falling over. Now, ideally in the human body, and actually under normal circumstances, our body fluids will also have 1% salt, which gives me, if I bring it up to 100, 99% water. Okay, and our body fluids are balancing the amount of salt and water to be equal to that inside of our cells, and our kidneys are involved in making that happen. So, so we call this an isotonic solution. Iso means the same. The amount of water is the same on each. Osmosis says water moves from high concentration to low. So every molecule that moves out of this cell, another one will move in. And that's the ideal situation. Okay. A hypotonic solution would be like putting pure water into our veins. A hypertonic solution would happen if we drank salt water, maybe seawater, and we would actually end up losing water from our cells. And an isotonic is what our body is maintaining in a homeostatic situation, the same amount of salt and water on both sides of the cell. Hopefully that gives you a good summary of osmosis.